Magick.me is the world's greatest school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. You can learn everything there, from chaos magic to hermeticism to meditation to how to supercharge your finances and take absolute control of your destiny. In short, you get all of the tools you need to turn chaos into beautiful, scintillating order and master your life. It's incredible. You've probably heard me talk about it on the show quite a lot, but check it out. It's growing fast. And I just want to say, if you're confused about where to start, because I have so many courses there, the Adept Initiative is the place to go. The Adept Initiative is the flagship course on magick.me, and it contains everything you need to know to master the most profound ancient techniques of changing your consciousness and the most modern and cutting-edge tools and systems for absolutely turning your life into a masterpiece. You're really going to dig it. Go check it out, and I will see you in class. It's magick.me, magick.me. Okay, thank you for being on, Don. And it really is a pleasure to have you on, as you are the OG and somebody who has been part of the occult scene for as long as I've been in it. And so it's an honor to have you on at last. Do you want to tell people a little bit about who you are and your work and your new book, Modern Magus, a manual for magicians of all schools? How to become a modern magus, excuse me.
Well, the way I began my work is I had been an initiate of the Temple of Set for some years. And when I approached the fourth degree, which is the degree of Magister Temple, my initiator, Stephen Flowers, said, you need to do something that's a masterpiece. You need to put something that's out in the world that exists independently of you. And up to that time, I had just written fiction, and mainly I'm known as a fiction writer. So that began my attempt at starting writing books explaining techniques to people. And my first few books were centered entirely within the tradition that I grew up in. Then a few years ago, I had people approach me and said, hey, I want to learn how to be a magician. I want to learn magical skills. And I said, okay, I'll sponsor you into the temple and you can do that. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I have found my religious path. I just want magical skills and I'll pay you to teach me. And I was at a loss because that was not in my inventory in any way, because all my inventory, the way I had learned things, was on a devotional, focused spiritual basis. And so I started thinking about what are the skills, particularly in the Western magical tradition, that are necessary, and what are the things that we learn that aren't so necessary. And so I began kind of creating a repertoire. Then a few years ago, as you probably read about in the papers, there was a COVID-19 epidemic in
I heard something
America.
about that.
You probably heard it, yeah. So I was home a lot. And I thought, all right, I'm going to go through the very processes I'm teaching. I'm going to put aside everything I know and play both the part of teacher and student and see what I can do in a year's time. And as I did that, I wrote a book called How to Be a Modern Magus. It's not its original title, but Inner Traditions actually is the only publisher I've ever dealt with that comes up with better titles. In fact, actually, the only publisher I've ever worked with that's really improved books. They're kind of exciting people to work with.
They changed the title on my John Dee book as well for the best, so that people would know it was a book about John Dee, because John Dee was not in the title. So I think that was probably wise on their part.
Well, they're just really good at that, right? I just think that they have a deep sensitivity to the gnosis that is quite impressive.
Yeah, they're great.
And then in the course of my book, I considered several things. I started asking people what had screwed up their initiation. Because all the magicians I knew in every school all talked about the fact that it would start initiation, it would get sidelined, they would come back and redo it. And I thought, what if I designed a book where it had years worth of exercises, but it also had what I call the Book of Gates, which is, hey, if you're hit with this crisis, like losing a job, starting a love affair, losing a love affair, bad health. What do you do? And that created the book. It mainly exists within the Western tradition, but I tried not to make it just a clone of, like, say, Golden Dawn techniques.
That's really, really great. That's interesting. So let's just circle back a little bit. So every magician, or almost every magician, I assume you've talked to from any school, has had that experience of getting knocked off path.
Mm-hmm.
And
because when you enter into initiation, you're entering into a will state of saying, everything in my life is meaningful. And that's how you transform yourself. But the problem is that then you can take negative messages as messages you should stop, rather than enjoying the pain of the negative state just as much.
Let's go straight for that. That is so, I feel like that's such a productive conversation to have, because that's something that I've come up again. I say come up again. I've come up against a lot, so I come up again against it all the time. And that's always the question when you're in those states. And I'm trying to think back. I mean, examples of my life, moving, career changes, obviously starting a relationship where you suddenly have to change your kind of vibe. Maybe somebody doesn't like magic as much as you, ending a relationship, or does this count as well? Kind of like drama or collapse of magical groups. So that's something I've been in. I've been in all of these, and my question to myself has always been exactly that. So let's just go for that. It's like, okay, like, am I getting messages to stop and slow down, or should I push through? And I've never been totally clear on that. And it's always the lingering question is, did I do the right thing, or did I fail the test, quote unquote?
Well, partially the question itself, and that you deal with it, is something that refines you. That is one of the fires of initiation, that fire of unknowing. But we tell ourselves stories all the time. The act of magic, which we think we're learning, is not true. We do magic all the time, 24/7. We create these states and we live in them. The problem is we usually create not very good or perceptive states. Let's play this out in a story. One day, you by a minor mistake, you screw up someone else's life. Let's say you turn in a report 10 minutes late, and the other guy is the one that takes the heat. First, they're mad at you. First, they're very angry at you. Then they forgive you. Seems like everything is smooth. But then you go on to have a really shitty day. Nothing works right. You have a lot of red lights. You can't get what you want for lunch, whatever the minor inconveniences are that slowly mount up. And by the time you go home, you have decided that you always screw things up. Now, the original problem, which existed not in your world, but this other human's world, you've taken it into yourself. You've built up this negative narrative, and then you're creating and summoning things based on that narrative. Now, then it's really easy to see how a non-control life produces stuff you don't want. But it can be the other side. It can be a very positive narrative you're telling yourself, making you feel really good till the moment that falls apart.
Like a coping strategy, a narrative you tell yourself to cope with. Like one that I always hear is like, oh, this had to happen for a reason. That type of thing.
Well, it did have to happen for a reason, but not the reason you think. It had to happen for the reason because you live in a three-dimensional body and you move through time. And so a lot of things are going to happen all the time. Which ones do you pay attention to? That's one of the toughest things to figure out as a human being. And actually harder for magicians because we look for omens and portents and dreams.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one thing that I think, magical people are overly prone to at different steps of their initiatory journey. I think if magicians are undergoing real initiation, quote unquote, they should hopefully be tempering everything they're doing with a fair degree of skepticism and scientific thinking and all that. But even so, I think magical thinkers, in the broadest sense of the term, are very prone to over-narrativization. Like, for instance, everything in you're constantly living in this abyssal state where everything relates to you, and the numbers on the clock relate to you. What people say to you suddenly has meaning upon meaning behind it, when none of that is necessarily really there, or at least should be focused on at all times.
The actual magical discernment comes from not the circumstance you see, but the feelings that come with it. True omens always have a sense of awe or wonder. But if you're just looking for omens, you'll find something and you'll worry it to death like a dog with a toy. But things that overwhelm you, that bliss of the otherworldly, is what you started the path for to start with. That's what really drew you into it. Not the practical stuff, not the I'm going to use magic to get laid or get paid. Okay, that's cool, great. But what's important is the sense of wonder, which is much more rare, and it's something you can take with you, presumably, to your next life.
Interesting. So say more about that. Take it with you to your next life.
Well, I haven't experienced it, so this is speculative. I tend to have kind of an Egyptian soulcraft. An Egyptian soulcraft would tell me. And I chose this not just because aesthetically I'm attracted to Egyptian ideas, but because I can perceive them in my life. There are parts of you that are reused again and again until you become a consistent being. Your ka, whatever your ka is, may have been the ka of several humans before you. Your ba is the spirit you have right now, right here. Now, the purpose of life, according to the Egyptians, and when I say the Egyptians, I'm going to say specifically the Egyptians of the 18th to the 20th dynasties. I mean, Egypt is a really, really long history. Anyone says anytime there's a sentence begins the Egyptians, whatever, the sentence is wrong. The sentence should always be the Egyptians during this period, whatever. The purpose of life is to fuse these two things, the soul of becoming, the ba, and the soul of being, the ka, into the effective soul, the ach, so that you take with you the better parts of your personality now. And that puts an imperative on you not to be a jerk, because you don't want to become an immortal, essential, unchanging jerk for all of eternity. That should not be anybody's goal, no matter how much of an asshole you might have started out as in your life.
That's interesting. So I do you remember the old World of Darkness games from the 90s? Like
A little bit.
Werewolf. Yeah, one of my hobbies is collecting these, and I've had an interesting experience a couple days ago, actually, where I was reading one of them that was talking about the Egyptian parts of the soul, and they actually cited one of your books in it. So that was an interesting synchronicity. I think yeah. So. But it was just an interesting experience because it reminded me of that Egyptian model of the soul. And I looked at it again, and they just cited it for the game, but it was the correct model. And I feel like that's probably the most satisfying and complete model of aspects of your, transpersonal self that I know of. I think probably more than Kabbalah or maybe the Hindu model, maybe not as much as the Buddhist model, but I'm not quite as clear on the Tibetan model. But it just seems so straightforward, practical, and common sense when you look at it.
Well, you had a unique situation in Egypt because you had a country that was very dense in terms of population, but very small in terms of physical area. I mean, if you look at a map of Egypt, you think, that's a big country. No, it's a tiny country because it just exists 2 miles on either side of the Nile.
Huh.
Because in this desert, you have to be living in the area where you can grow food.
Were people able to leave that area? Like, could they leave the water and crops and survive very long, or did they have to be clustered there really tight in?
They tended to be clustered, and they tended to look down on people that crossed the desert. In fact, the Egyptian word for foreigners is literally translated as the wretched crosser of deserts. They really pull back on that idea. But they were very open to ideas outside themselves. The Egyptians were an ethnically diverse group of people. They accepted you as Egyptian if you moved there and learned to speak Egyptian.
That I've never heard before, and I feel like I keep wanting to go on everything you. There's so many fascinating tangents in the things that you're saying, so I don't want to get too off track here. But that is really interesting to me, just because the ethnicity of Egyptians is, I've seen it go back and forth many times over my lifetime, and it seems to be a point of political tension or contention. Much like the ethnicity of Jesus or something like this. But I have not heard that it was a multicultural society, and that's really interesting.
Well, I'll consider, because we have portraits of the pharaohs. And you have pharaohs that are mostly looking what you think of as Middle Eastern, looking Arabic. But you also have red-headed pharaohs, you had blonde pharaohs, you had pharaohs with black skin.
Mm-hmm.
And nowhere does anyone say, hey, this red-headed pharaoh, like the Ramesses family, all had bright red hair. No one says, hey, those guys aren't Egyptian. No, they're the head of the country. They're the living Horus. They're the embodiment of the culture. And you don't say a few years later, when you have pharaohs whose ancestry comes from Nubia, they're just as black as can be. Say, oh, they're not Egyptian. Nope, they're clearly the pharaoh. Had no problem with that in ways that we don't. We tend to view, most of the ideas we have of race tend to come from European colonialism. And, and they were invented to put forth the idea that one group of people, i.e. white-skinned people with better weapons technology, were better than brown-skinned people with inferior weapons technology.
Mm-hmm. And that seems to not really...
They had better guns.
And that seems to not really play out at all if you look back through history in terms of these cultures seem to have been pretty multicultural. Even England and I presume Rome and things like this were very cosmopolitan. In the case of Rome, capitals of empires. So I imagine kind of everyone was there. You talk a lot about Egyptian soulcraft in the book. So how did this come through in a practical way? Or what did you recommend for people in engaging with this material?
Well, first off, I want people to be aware as they develop their magical skills that they have a lot of things going on in their lives. And we tend at various times in our lives to become very attracted to one or another parts of our being and think of that as this is the road to salvation, this is the road to power, this is the road to pleasure, whatever we're looking for at the time. And what we should be aware of is there are several things going on. And whatever we're paying attention to here means there's something else that we're neglecting over there. And so therefore I took the 8 principal parts of the soul and said, hey, let's consider these in a group of contrasting pairs and consider what these things might be in ourselves and work in that area to increase them. I'm not by any means the first person to do this, right? Almost everyone that's been some kind of magical teacher in the last 200, maybe 300 years has considered this. Gurdjieff was really, really clear on this, right? He says, the 4 ways of being, the first being the fakir, working with the body. We all know people like that. I have friends that spend hours in the gym every week and whose bodies have, 1% total body fat. And they practice yoga and they just kind of shine with health. And they see this as this is the road to progress. Well, that'll work for, about 90 years, but it's not going to work much further than that. Or a path of devotion. Like if I pray, if I get closer to this God, I am getting better. That's great, but that's great for the God, but what's that doing for you? Or we can say, I'm going to look for the essential, eternal parts of myself. All right, very excellent. You'll get some power there, but you'll never get anything beyond that power. Or we take the road of, I'm just going to deal with what I can build up in this lifetime. My ideas are everything. Again, you can go quite some ways with that, but it's really limited. So I suggested using a soulcraft that takes on a variety of different approaches and take you through these approaches. So it created a basic sense of orienting you inside you, that you become aware of parts of yourself that you may or may not be aware of. And a very common part, the Egyptian idea of the Ren, the name. We don't think about that very much. Your name not only expresses who you are, that's not just that encapsulated thing stuck that you fill out a form with, but your greater reputation is also something that affects you.
Yeah, I would
and how
perhaps
people think it affects you.
I would perhaps argue that people think about this all the time. If you think about social media and Twitter and canceling and reputation building and likes and all of that, it seems to be the primary, not just concern of, let's just say for America, it seems to be not just the primary concern of quite a lot of America, but it seems to be their job. It seems to be the underpinning of the American economy in some ways. It's just people producing social capital.
Oh, well, actually, I'll consider you're probably right about that. I mean, there's a great change that came through the entire consciousness of the world with the coming of social media. And we have no idea really what that is yet, right? But we do have this really startling moment that before social media came along, it never occurred to anybody that someone is thinking about us. Now we think someone's thinking about us all the time. I mean, some people are so worried about what's going on, they put forth pictures of what they ate. Because they think people want to know what I had for lunch.
Or they're going to be...
No one wants to know what you had for lunch. You won't want to know what you had for lunch tomorrow.
I think Heidegger, I can't remember the German word, but in one of his books, he has a German word that just represents them that are constant, like the man in the street who is constantly watching, and the imagined God form of the common opinion that always has its eye on you, even though it's completely fictional, that we constantly feel that we are watched by this.
Well, a lot of things, social media took that to an extreme. The coming of modernist fiction, no doubt, really changed that. Because before modernist fiction, you tended to view people as sort of this heroic mold. Even if the character was not a hero in the sense of a godlike figure, it's a figure that you would see the big movement of their lives, and their life had an arc. And the modernist fiction confronted us with the fact that a lot of our lives don't have an arc. You may be the most profound, beautiful, wonderful thinker at noon, just after you gave your lecture at the university, but you're the same person at midnight, being sick into your toilet.
Yeah.
And being absolutely thinking you're going to die in the next minute. And that's within 12 hours of each other. Who are you? What is the constant between those two poles?
Yeah, so I feel that, we've talked about modernist fiction on the podcast a lot. We talked about James Joyce and Ulysses and the internal narrative stream kind of revealing the inner world of the human around the same time as psychotherapy became very popular. And then if I'm thinking back on this concept of what you say about social media, I thought a lot about, I feel that the real antecedents precedents for social media were like talk show culture in the 80s and America's Funniest Home Videos. It's like literally, it's like, and then it's, if you really think about that, it's like the political system that rules us is not, one of the systems better defined and studied by political scientists or fascism or democracy or anything like this. It's America's Funniest Home Videos that we're constantly caught in this loop of looking at each other's home videos forever, and therefore distracted from any productive activity.
You're quite correct. It's a profound moment, because suddenly the average person had two thoughts, one of which was, I can produce something of value. I can have something that everybody's going to laugh at, and that's the value. And then two, it's also when I am in the least control and least competent as a human being. That's a very strange thought.
That is weird.
It's not like I'm going to be known for my great moment of human nobility, but I'm going to be known for, slipping on a banana peel.
Yes.
I watched a interview once with the guy that did America's Funniest Home Videos, and this was on the internet for a while, but I haven't found it in years. So I guess someone tracked it down and killed it. where I can't think of the name of the rather unfortunate person that brought that to us, but he's just as drunk as he can be. And he's talking about the video that has the squirrel skiing. You may think back to the film with the squirrel water skiing in it.
Vaguely.
And admitted that in the actual original video, which was apparently just a few seconds longer, the skis went different directions and it split the squirrel into.
Oh, Lord.
And he's just laughing, just maniacally.
No.
Jesus. And it was interesting because it's all in the editing.
That's really disturbing.
I think that there is a path. Someone will invent a spiritual path someday of being a video producer.
Interesting. Well, you have the power to manipulate and change and frame reality, for sure. It's hard. I think that's interesting. Also, if you look at that just from a situationist perspective, it's like it's almost like it draws people more and more into the system, because now you're tasked not just with being a consumer of the spectacle, but a producer of the spectacle and like a sharing the conspiratorial guilt of the spectacle.
Yeah, the path, I guess, of becoming aware of Maya is to make Maya. To actually see how your own actions become distorted or edited or used for purposes not what you really wanted to be used for.
So how do you feel about this in general? Is this a social media and all this from a magical perspective? Do you see this as a positive or negative or more? What angle do you see this from? What angles, I should say?
I think that by and large, the evolution of consciousness on this planet, the way consciousness itself has changed form, is not based on some of the outward things going on, like writing or social media or fire even. But it arises from people within whatever's going on that are the better people, that are the true elect at a given age. And sadly, that cannot be owned by a particular religion or path or people. In fact, that's the downfall, right? Because one spiritual movement starts getting really good people and think, this is it. Let's all jump on that bandwagon. No, these things have seasons. Social media presents far too many distractions for the distracted person, but for the focused person, it produces thousands of doorways, and maybe they can find the right doorway.
Yeah.
It takes all the problems of life and clicks it up a couple more notches on the knob.
Yeah, it also adds an additional burden to your life of now you have to document as well as living your life, which is just too much for most people. And I think unless you're that type of person, and having lived in LA for 11 years, I would suggest not becoming that type of person to anyone listening. It's not a good thing. But I did have Stephen Flowers on this podcast a few years ago, and we were talking about, we were kind of mutually somewhat reminiscing about the occult world in the 90s, when it was still possible to meet a group of people who were like knew all this stuff that like you'd never heard of, and there was like this unbelievable subterranean world where like there was all this stuff that just was truly, I mean, it was just stuff published by small presses, or people were talking about ideas, or these days actually just people who are literate and read books, which is its own Gnostic cult at this point. But that I really feel kind of went away with social media. And of course, all the major occult groups have their social media presence, and, you can see everyone hanging out on Facebook. And one thing that I noticed as well is, a lot of the people that back in the 80s or 90s seemed like these fearsome individuals that would be these, you read these books and you're like, who are these wizards in these castles throwing lightning bolts? And then, now that we have Facebook, you like go to their Facebook page and it's like InfoWars links and like all this, like, you can see, okay, well, this is just somebody that lives in a trailer park, right? So not just, I shouldn't say, but people put on airs that they can't maintain in the world of social media. So that has been interesting, but it's a real loss too. I feel that it's not the same, even though that there is so much more access to information. And I do think that podcasts are the one oasis in that desert, because the counter part of this is that it's allowed for this, which is long form, hours long conversation, which people did not have before as much. But I do believe I really do feel that social media is the current purest expression of the Aeon of Horus, or the Aeon of Karanzan, maybe. And I think,
no, absolutely. Social media is the form, the body of Horus these days. He is actually very powerful in that sense, because in the cosmology of the Temple of Set, we have the two gods. We have Horus, who's the god of mankind, this entire social matrix you live in, and then we have Set, who is the isolator. And the absolute original form of the word Set, Egyptian Sutach, meant the stabilizer. Now, that's a confusing name for the god of chaos. What is the name of the god of chaos? Stabilizer. The hell, right? They're like, were Egyptians confused? But of course, once you deal with that paradox a while, you realize the way to deal with chaos is to become stable, to become the one constant in an equation full of variables. This is the way, as far as we're concerned. And Horus is always about interconnection. Now, what social media has done is it has removed the benefits of the doctrine of effort. Let's say that you were wanting to become a magician, and you discovered that somewhere miles away, maybe in another country, in a far valley, there is this person that teaches, and you sell everything you have to make this long trek there, and you knock on their door and wait outside their home for days before they take you in. You're going to receive revelation. Whether or not even that person has revelation, that's not the point. What you went through was the point.
yes.
Now, if you want access to somebody, you can spend 10, 15 minutes searching on the internet if they're obscure, and you can discover them, start a dialogue with them, know about them immediately. So in that sense, effort is gone. So we have to find a different place to make effort, and it has to now become a completely interior one. We have to study your own life and say, what's the effort I need to make?
Well, for me, I think that there's obviously great things about that. I mean, just the ability to have access to all of this occult information when that was impossible even a few decades ago is, even if you were in the university library system, perhaps, it would have been very hard and time consuming, is profound. And so the difficulty now, I think it's in many ways more effort needs to be exerted, but the effort now is not discovering the information or questing for the information. It's collating the information, sifting the positive or the useful from the unuseful, and something that is even harder, which is exerting discipline over yourself to actually practice it. Because what happens is people just get into spiritual materialism. They get heaps and heaps and heaps of all this easily accessible occult information, whether it's books or PDFs or courses or whatever, but it's just, then they never practice any of it. So that's, I think, the initiatory hurdle that has to be overcome. I mean, you have to force yourself to actually do it, and not just do it, but practice it over a long extended period of time. And that's actually quite hard to do without a teacher or an initiatory group, as I've discovered in my life, having been in them and out of them, and having had teachers and then not have had teachers, no matter how, whatever the potential pitfalls of a group like that might be, it's much harder to do that without somebody reminding you to do it. It's much harder to do it on your own. So I think that's the effort that is called for.
There's a Sanskrit parable that fits this. And it says that there are three paths of knowledge. The first path is the path you were just referring to, and that's the path of the monkey. The monkey is on a tree, and it runs over and it eats a fruit. It's really happy. Then it sees a fruit over there, and it goes to that fruit, and it gets another fruit, jumps around to another tree, finds another fruit. It makes no progress, but it has several sweet moments of eating the fruit. This is the average person in the occult world. They will come across some idea, and they're thrilled with the idea, and it's fun to read about. Man, it's great. You open up one of Stephen Flower's books on the runes, like, oh, this is excellent. Wow. You don't really do anything, but as you read about it, you have this fantasy. Then there's the path of the eagle. This is a very rare path. I have never known anyone to pursue this path and succeed, which is, I am starting at the low point of the tree, and I'm going to fly without resting all the way to the top of the tree. It takes tremendous sense of will, and it takes a tremendous initiatory vision at the beginning. There are famous people who have done this in history. It's not something you see, nothing I've ever seen in this life. And then you have the third path, the path of the mounted master, a man on a horse, the horse being the body, being the circumstances of life, who progresses constantly upward, but accepts the fact that progress is slow and sometimes difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like in order to do everything in one shot, you basically would have to be cloistered in some type of monastic facility where other people are kind of looking after your basic needs. I can't really imagine any other way to do it that linearly. That would be my assumption. Let's I want to circle back though. I want to talk about Set. Set is fascinating to me. I like Set quite a bit. I think that one of the points I was going to touch upon with the Aeon of Horus things is I think I get this thing sometimes from magicians who are very experienced, who've been have 30, 40 years of experience. I mean, you often get people like getting really sick of the Aeon of Horus. I mean, like Dave Lee, the chaos magician, has written about this. It's just like, oh God, like the endless Aeon of the restless child. It's just like, please, like just stop with your constant babbling and the constant America's Funniest Home Videos nature of reality. And Set provides, I wouldn't just say a refreshing. Set to me does represent the inner initiatory current of the Aeon, and I do think it is a stabilizing perspective. It can be a quite frightening perspective at some times, but certainly one worthy of respect. And it is, I think that perspective of the Temple of Set on Set is has always been very refreshing to me, having read the material and interacted with Setians in my life. So talk about that a little bit. Talk about perhaps Set as the path of Set as an initiatory path. I know there's a lot in there to talk about, but the idea of isolate intoxication or the isolate individual, I mean, we get from not just the common New Age movement, but even Crowley and apparently left-hand path people were constantly the idea of dissolving the self in devotion to something higher, and the constant admonitions to not isolate your individuality. And so the perspective that actually maybe you should do that is still, I think, a challenging one. So maybe if you'd like to talk about that a little bit.
The moment that Setians sum up with the Egyptian verb kefir, to come into being, is a moment that all humans have. It's not not something we own in any way. All of us have had the experience. Well, all of us that are alert enough to tune into this podcast have had this experience, where you take an idea that you understand intellectually. I've got this whole idea of justice now. I understand this. And then some experience that you're involved in, suddenly it floods over your body and you understand justice. Now, if you put it in words 15 seconds before you understood it, or put it in words 15 seconds afterward, it's the same words. looks exactly the same to an outside source, but we have that experience of really getting it. In other words, it's become part of your inventory at a deep and spiritual level. And you can do this with any concept, art, justice, magic. And then eventually, and the most important one is who you are, who yourself is. You have to wait until that's created in yourself. Now, in the Aeon of Horus, in the work that Crowley did, Crowley had a tremendous and powerful revelation. And it was not when he got the Book of the Law. It came about 5 years later. He realized that you have to initially transcend social conditioning. Social conditioning is there to make you a good herd animal. And that's a good thing. We want to be a good herd animal. I want to be a good herd animal when I'm out driving in the streets. And if I see a red light, I stop, like all herd animals, because I don't want to hit somebody. That's a good thing. But I don't want to be a herd animal in everything. Crowley's big breakthrough was that getting rid of social conditioning does not have to be through suffering. It could also be through pleasure. And one of Crowley's biggest initiatory moments, the moment when he realized he was a master of the temple, he was being sodomized. And suddenly had this moment of, hey, this is it. Now, this is not the path for everyone. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm not telling you to go get sodomized. Okay, no. It could be any pleasure. It could be having a big spaghetti dinner with your family. But it's that moment of you realize your true self just as well through pleasure as you do through pain. And as you begin to add to that self and make that self come into being, it is a true and real guide. That's just a very difficult thing for humans to start with because we're so capable of error. Even after we become enlightened, we're capable of error.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, I agree. I think the vision in the voice is Crowley's best moment, and that moment in the 15, I think it was the 15th Aether. There was another layer to that too, where it wasn't just because he had been an active bisexual and homosexual for quite a while. The thing that was taboo breaking for him was being the bottom. That was a big deal for him because he had to surrender control and perhaps admit to himself that actually, maybe he was gay instead of being able to dwell in a macho fantasy.
It's a concept we don't have now, but in Edwardian times, the idea was as long as you were the active figure, you were manly.
It's still true in
a woman today, but you'll do. Come here, boy.
It's still true in some Hispanic cultures. So and other cultures for sure. So that was the big one for him. But I think just that idea, whatever it is, for me, the core idea of the Aeon of Horus, that suffering is not necessary for initiation. For me, that's a huge idea, and I don't think that people have fully got to grips with it. I think that despite the controversy around him, you may know Daniel Gunther wrote that book Initiation in the Aeon of Horus, which I thought was actually really good and kind of brings that out. It's not an endorsement of anything else going on in that end of the world, but I thought it was a good book. But that's a really hard thing. I mean, just in day-to-day life, to accept enjoyment and that life can be nice and does not have to be a consistent sequence of self-crucifixions and letting everyone know that you're doing this. That's tough, surprisingly. And that says a lot just to realize that.
We have the idea of suffering is a really useful social control idea because it makes people accept their lives in a way that they don't need to accept them. It's one thing to say, no, that's just what's going on now. You'll be stoic, right? Which is a very good mind hack, stoicism. And probably a better mind hack than Christianity, which is my suffering is an offering to God. Well, why did God make you for that?
Yes.
That was like a bad design choice on God's part. The idea that initiation can be anything works if you assume your whole life is anything. It's just a matter of being awake, right? And then that probably Gurdjieff said that the best when he wasn't fucking around. But all masters tend to be, they fuck around because they're experimenting with their pupils, and that's their forbidden truth, right? If you're around a guru, the guru is running experiments on you.
Mm-hmm.
You'd better hope it's a good guru, and they don't have really horrible experiments left to run than bad gurus who have to do everything on you.
Yeah, Trungpa is a great example of that in terms of extreme social experimentation.
Yeah, I mean, when you look for a school, and I think schools are necessary for at least part of your development.
I agree.
Don't look at the leader. Who gives a fuck about the leader? Look at the graduates of the school.
Yes.
Did they get better? Are they happy? Are they successful being whatever they are?
Are they people that you would want to be?
For.
I think is what I always think of. It's like, it's like the people who are, and that's not even just a magical school. That could be like a religious group or so whatever. Even a job, I assume. It's like, are the people who are the people who have graduated this and actually applied this to their life to the extent that it is possible to do so. Would you like to be those people? And usually the answer is no for me. Sometimes it's not.
Don't get in the front of the assembly line if you don't like what's coming off on the other end.
Yeah, that's that better put. Yeah, for sure. So what is the perspective? What is the Setian perspective on what you're talking about with this kind of Aeon of Horus insight of Crowley's or current of the Aeon?
Well, I think Crowley's downfall is he seeks something that is outside the mechanistic universe. He wants to have something that's not based on the cause and effect world, which is what initiation is. He's right about that. But then he assumes the path to that must entirely be inside the mechanistic world, particularly in the form of drugs, right? And so that actually does not take you to enlightenment. That may give you some useful states along the way, but you don't need very much of that at all. I think you probably needed more of that in Victorian, Edwardian times than you do now. Crowley was a classically trained scholar and mountaineer and chess master. Yeah, he needed something to get outside himself. Most Americans don't need something to get outside themselves. They're already way too loose. Their psyche is just open.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. That's another thing I appreciate about the Setian perspective. And I think that, or even just Crowley, one of the things I tell this to people too, it's like one of the biggest things you can get from Crowley is not even magic. It's the benefit of, an education as it was at that time in history, where you go through that reading list and you are exposed to that level of rigor of study. And it's currently not the best or the peak of all possible, but it's a whole lot better than the American school system. And I think that one of the most important things you can get from magical practice is just discipline. And there was an essay online there's somebody in the Thelemic, kind of broader Thelemic world named Keith 418, excuse me, who has his blog may or may not still be up, but he wrote an essay quite a while ago that it's one of those things you can't unsee, and I think it was really brilliant. And he said that what is actually going on, he basically did a Marxist analysis of secret societies, and he said that what's actually going on in initiatory groups is that people in the middle class are training people in the lower class to enter the middle class by doing things like teaching them how to write, teaching them how to read, teaching them how to show up at meetings on time, teaching them how to formulate a goal in life, and so on, teaching them how to interact with other people in kind of like a pseudo corporate environment. And I think that is probably true. And of course, he coupled this with the bitter insight, or not insight, but the bitter proclamation that for most people, it just wasn't going to happen, that they were not going to be able to transcend their class. And I'm not sure I agree with him on that, but in some cases, unfortunately, it is true. I think that was probably that's probably too cynical. But the reason that I bring this up is you mentioned Americans being too loose. I think that to articulate a self and stick to it in the same way that you're talking about people get knocked off the path all the time, that is really, really hard. And it gets harder all the time because the distractions get better and better all the time. And that for me is much harder and has been much more fruitful in my life, and is much, whether that makes me left-handed or not, it's just like that for me is the way to go, rather than this idea that, oh, you're going to do 10,000 mushrooms and dissolve yourself into the Great Mother. It's like, well, good luck with that, but you still got to get a job when you're on the other side of that.
One of the problems, and particularly for this current generation of magicians, is that the grandfather of chaos magic, Austin Spare, undoubtedly a magician of great power, didn't develop anything else in his life to stabilize his life. He was a pass-out drunk that lived in tremendous poverty for years and would be ripped off by his artistic clients for the last few decades of his life. And is that necessarily then the magic system you want to just thoroughly throw yourself at? The path of ecstasy or nothing is a bad path. You may be on it for a few weeks or a few months, but you can't be on it for a few years without it just wrecking you in some way. Ralph Tegmeyer, Roger Yugi. Ralph points out that the best magicians he's trained are never trust fund babies that can give all their time to magic. And this is true because I've had a couple of these students myself. It's people that have a 40, 50 an hour week job and are taking care of a household and a family and have a tough schedule. And
I agree with that.
Time for magic.
I agree with that.
These guys make huge progress.
Crowley had that experience as well with, I think, one of his students, his best student at Sheffield was Frank Bennett or something like that, who was a bricklayer, although Tobias Churton told me that is probably Crowley playing up his blue collar credentials too much. But, he was a working guy. And I think that's true. And I think it's true of anything, though. If you're learning something and you have skin in the game, it's not just an idle distraction for you. It's like if you're learning magic because you need it to work, you're going to be a lot better than someone who's just playing a parlor game.
Well, for centuries, at least for the last 300 years in particular, Freemasonry has had this effect in the Western world, right? Where small amounts of the gnosis are given to people who are active members of society of good character. Mm-hmm. That's a really powerful formula.
It is, yeah.
Well, I know you will get up and get things done because you do that every day to go to work. All of your friends report well of you. You don't beat your wife. You are decent to your employees or to your boss. We're going to give you a little bit of we're going to give you a little dose of the gnosis and brotherhood with similar brothers. That's a powerful formula.
It is. I think it's
an abused formula because it becomes gender and race specific, but it's a good formula to start with.
Yeah, I think you can clearly point to, at least in America, Freemasonry in America is possibly the most successful Hermetic expression, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's certainly the most stable and the longest lasting, although it may not survive this generation, unfortunately. I am a Freemason. I've watched it dwindle in I've been a Freemason since 2008. And it's a weird one because, it's a primarily greatest generation organization. Those people, those who are still here, are not going to be here that much longer. The baby boomers did not join at all. But then tons of millennials joined looking for gnosis. And I think becoming frustrated when they only got the tiny amount that you're talking about and lost interest. So hopefully I think that joining Freemasonry for those who have the inclination is always something that I certainly don't have anything bad to say about it. I think that it's a very maturing experience, particularly for wayward young men, but of good character. But yeah, I feel like we got off track a little bit. I want to keep coming back to Set. One thing that one thing that I'm not clear on actually is where does the Temple of Set fall generally on the nature of the self, in the sense of, are you essentialists or more Buddhist about it, in terms of, is there a core self or soul or not?
We're essentialists. We believe there is a core soul, in the same sense that acorns exist, right? If I walk out in my yard, because I live in Austin like you do, and I have live oaks in my front yard, if I'm barefoot, I can find a lot of acorns.
Yeah.
Tons of acorns out there.
Yep.
Thousands, sometimes millions of acorns when I'm cleaning up the damn yard. But they're not trees, and most of them will never become trees, and they will sit there and they will rot and be eaten by the big tree. Souls exist, and you have certain innate properties, and you should certainly, in your unfolding, discover those properties. But the main job is the unfolding. The main job is putting that acorn in a place where the soil has been prepared and the rocks are removed, and it can get sunlight and water and all the things it needs in its season. So everyone probably starts out with this. And I don't know, certainly different settings would disagree with this. This is not doctrinal in any way. I think not everyone is called to the spiritual life or needs to be. And some people need just enough spiritual life to help them do things like marry well, get a job they don't hate, learn to appreciate art and the soul a little bit, and maybe do a little magic. Yeah, why not?
Mm-hmm.
But there are some people who have stronger needs than that. If that's born in them, I don't know. I don't know if that is grace, if that's some force of some force beyond them, or if that's an internal property, or I suspect maybe something of both.
Yeah, you know them when you see them, for sure. Yeah. What is the left-hand path for you and your new book, which I suppose it doesn't seem like a left-hand path book to me, but is it relevant for people of any school?
I try to make it relevant for people of any school. The left-hand path usually, it's the path of non-union. Those in the left-hand path do not desire to be dissolved into a greater form. Often the left-hand path is known for its antinomian practices. Sexuality, polluted substance, acceptance of negative emotional states, more so than right-hand path brethren. But magic is itself its own discipline. And so I wanted to write something for everyone that practiced magic, because I think there's a lot of things in the world that have some overlays that don't need to be there. And a lot of those overlays come from teachers from the last century, whether it's Franz Barden or Aleister Crowley, usually. Certainly from Golden Dawn and Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor offshoots. And I tried to say, all right, here are some things you can do, and mainly with the questions, because I put an exercise, I go do this, and then I gave some pretty open-ended questions. There aren't right answers to those questions. If you decide today, I'm just going to read the questions on each section, I'm ready. No. And your answers will be different than other people. I want people to discover that they can have results that are beyond the mechanistic world, beyond the normal probability of the world, and that they can make decisions with their hearts and minds about those things. Magic is akin to the Setian ideal of self-creation, of Kepler, because magicians are creating themselves. They are making parts of themselves stable and clear and definable in a world that is not stable, not clear, and often without external definition. Probably more so for us than for a traditional society, because there is no traditional society that modern Americans or Canadians or Frenchmen or whatever are growing up in. There's a deeply pluralistic society with all the huge benefits and huge problems that come with that.
Interesting. So if you're saying that you mentioned earlier that one of your issues with Crowley is that he assumed there was something outside of the mechanistic universe, but that the mechanism to get there was within it. And yet you're saying that you're proposing methods for how to do that. What is the difference, and what are you proposing?
The way you find your way out of the cave, where you find your way out of the mechanistic universe, is unique to everyone. Everyone has their own door. And when you have that moment of revelation, that moment of there is something deeper than just the world I live in, that for you is your door. And you have to enlarge that opening. And that's something you created. It wasn't something that was given to you by a drug or by a school or by saying a certain mantra. It may have occurred to you in the process, in any of these things. Any of these things may be the moment of revelation. One of the most important moments of revelation in my own life, long before I began what I would call a spiritual practice, involved lug nuts. And lug nuts are what changed my life, and I will tell you that story. I was living in Lubbock, Texas. A friend of mine knocked on my door. Not a friend, an acquaintance. Remember this. An acquaintance knocked on my door and said, "Hey, I just bought a car in Oklahoma City. I'm going to drive over and get it. You want to come with me?" And I didn't really have anything to do the next day. And well, why not? So I said, "Yeah, sure." Went and got in the car with him. This is pre-cell phone. Cell phones have removed certain aspects of life. And I'm driving along with this guy, and we're going to drive into the night. We're going to hit Oklahoma City about dawn. So we're zipping through, the darkness of Oklahoma, 3 a.m. And this guy looks over at me and says, "You may not believe this, but my car only has 8 lug nuts." And I said, "What?" He says, "Yeah, over the years when I've changed my flats, I've lost 8 lug nuts. I just got 2 lug nuts on every wheel." And I suddenly realized I'm going to fucking die in the middle of Oklahoma at 3 a.m. with an idiot that's not close to me as a friend, and my parents and my girlfriend don't know where I am. I am going to die here. I am going to die because I did this incredibly stupid thing. This is now the most important moment in my life. This was the life-defining situation. And about that time, his car began to overheat, and then smoke is coming out. So we pull into a truck stop. I get out of the damn car while he goes in to eat, and I go and take 1 lug nut off each of 4 vehicles and put it on his tires. And it was that moment I had the actual realization of, I am really alive. I have to be responsible for my life.
Yeah.
And there are forces in my life that are bigger than me, and I'm making agreements with them all the damn time. Now, I did not go on to found a church of lug nuts. I did not go on to found a religion based on your relationship to the lug nut. But that was a moment for me. That did not come from the mechanistic universe. Oh, sure, the problem was there from the mechanistic universe, which was none of his wheels were stable and neither was the guy driving. But it came from the realization of, I am totally, absolutely 100% asleep. And I sleptwalk into this dangerous place. And it's and it's just as dangerous as being in the middle of a battlefield with people shooting at me. And it never occurred to me that's where I was.
Huh. Isn't there's a
Celt? So then, shortly thereafter, I had sort of dabbled in the occult. I went back to it and said, "Hey, what's the real mechanism behind this? Is it a God outside myself? Is it me? Is it some combination? Is there an answer? And does someone have the answer?"
Isn't there a Celtic god named Lug?
Louv, yeah. He's the god that's second best at everything, which is kind of a wonderful title as a god.
That's no one would suspect you. That's great. Yeah, that's a great story. It makes me think of like the act of being in this insane reality, but like it seems to me like the act of stealing lug nuts off of other cars and putting them on this guy's cars is like the hack or the breaking the rules that represents magic, perhaps.
Oh, because what I was doing in any sense of the world would be illegal. And even if I'd gone in and asked someone, may I have one of your lug nuts? They're not going to give that to some, guy they're meeting at 3 a.m.
Right.
So I'm having to have stealth, and I'm having to use skills, and I had to do it. And so, it was a very wonderful, life-changing moment.
And so you relate this to the left-hand path in some way.
Well, yeah, because it involved breaking social norms, right? I'm literally stealing things. I'm literally doing something I could go to jail for. I am doing it on my own. No one told me to do it. My guru did not appear to me and say, go forth and take the lug nut. The force is with you. It's required. I had to be thoughtful. I mean, I could have taken 4 lug nuts from one guy, right? But I did not want to endanger other people. And not all lug nuts are the same size. I didn't know that either. Nope, that one doesn't fit my leg wrench. So involved rapidly learning something, rapidly making a decision, transgressing social norms, and change in an instant. Most initiatory change occurs in a lightning flash moment, but you've been preparing for it for months and years. That's so you can recognize it.
What would another example be?
I'll give you the counterexample.
Okay.
I got one really good counterexample. I have a friend who is a tremendous scholar of Germanic myth and has a variety of books on the topic. His wife, who is not interested in Germanic myth, was in her office one day and was looking at his titles and said to him, "What is Thor?" And the moment she said that, perfect synchronicity, there was a huge lightning bolt outside, close to where they live. Boom! And my friend made a gesture. And she looked at him like, what? No, I asked you a question. What? Now, for him, because of years of practice, that was a deeply meaningful moment. For her, that was not a deeply meaningful moment.
Interesting.
And for everybody in their community, I'm sure no one had that moment of, oh yes, Thor is manifest.
He must have thought he was really on that day, though. I'd be very impressed with myself if that happened.
Well,
the gods are with me.
Is it me, or is it the gods? And true moments of magic transcend that notion.
Yeah,
because we think we have strong boundaries between self and not self, but we don't.
And of course, I would say similar counter to that, or similar to that, in my life, often, you can be dwelling on the problem forever, meaning being a scholar of myth or magic or things like this and just obsessing over details. And then somebody with no background in it can just show up and make an observation about what you're doing that is like the answer that completely eluded you the entire time because you were too close to see it, but it's obvious to perhaps to other people. So that I think is pretty funny too. Even the perhaps the transmission of the Book of the Law with Rose Kelly is a similar scenario in some ways, where it's somebody who is supposedly quote unquote normal that actually provides the answer.
Well, the Book of the Law is particularly interesting that after he transcribed this, he took it home and he lost the manuscript for a year. He didn't take it home and I'm going to study this now. This is the moment. And now this, of course, may be a lie because it's Crowley telling his story, and Crowley was probably not a servant of the truth, whatever he was a servant of. But according to him, he was getting ready to go skiing and found it, and then realized its worth upon rereading it a year later.
Yeah, the funny thing about that story is I believe it was he said it was in his attic underneath his skis and the Enochian tablets, but whether or not that was true, it literally was rediscovered, I think, in the 90s in somebody else's attic in Oakland or San Francisco. And then this person just happened, came with the house, and this person just happened to know somebody in the OTO. So it ended up back in the hands of the OTO that way. So again, in the attic.
That's not the true story.
Oh,
and I'll
carry on.
The true story. You probably have noticed, since you've lived in Austin, down in the middle of the city, there's the University of Texas, Austin.
Yeah.
No doubt you've seen this. And a guy named Sid Richardson, very wealthy oil man, came to his alma mater, University of Texas, says, I want you to have the world's best collection of something, and I'll give you millions of dollars, but it has to be the best collection. Wow. So the University of Texas says, what the hell can we get the best collection of? It can't be medieval manuscripts. It's too late.
Wait, universities sell collections? Universities sell collections to private individuals?
Yeah.
I did not know that. That seems
And so
odd.
He gave millions UT, and they said, we're going to make the best collection of modernists. And so this money went out, right? And they started buying stuff. And they had put this thing out saying, we want to buy anything with Joyce and Yates and so forth. About that time, a museum, a storehouse, a warehouse in Detroit said, hey, we just found this big box full of early Yates manuscript books and manuscripts, and they're signed, and we'll sell them to you. And I said, yeah, sure, we'll buy them. Here, take this large amount of money. And they said, there's some other stuff in here too. There's like handwritten journals, whatever it is, just send it to us. So they sent it down to the HRC, which is where the Book of the Law is. If you want to go read it, you can.
Oh, I didn't realize. I've been meaning to get down there forever. I didn't realize they had the. Okay, well,
they got the original.
That's my next stop.
Before they'll show it to you, they'll call the OTO. So if you've pissed off the OTO in any way, don't do it.
I don't think so. Really? Oh, they own it now?
They own it.
They have to check whether they have to clear it with the OTO?
They have some legal arrangement because the OTO said, hey, wait a minute, that's our scripture, give it back to us. And UT said, hey, we bought it fair and square, and we can preserve the manuscript for everybody. And
have you done this? Have you gone? Have you gone to? No. You haven't looked at it.
I've had friends come to stay with me that have studied the original.
Interesting.
A couple of people who, at the time, were high-ranking initiates in the OTO, and in fact, they were such good OTO scholars they were thrown out. You may do your own math on that one. And so this was given to the guy that was doing their science fiction collection, Willie Cyrus. Great man, Willie. Loved Willie to death. And Willie was, and he came across this thing, and he read it, and he realized, because he read who Crowley was, he realized what the fuck it was, which of course is in itself a moment, right? There's something that takes care of magical manuscripts.
Yes. That's interesting. That's
like John Dee's 48 Keys.
Yeah.
Saved from a fire. Someone grabbed it and took it, and then it wound up, eventually Ashmole gets it, or the Greek magic papyri, or any of these things.
That's totally different from the story that I heard, which it must have been, I think, now that I'm thinking back, it was either I think it was probably in like an alt magic post from back when, you remember that news group. Different story, interesting, but broadly the same, other than it wasn't in an attic.
Well, everything develops folklore. Like, I'd heard for years the story of Crowley and Gurdjieff meeting.
Yeah.
Several people had told me this story, and it's all told by Gurdjieffian. So the point of the story is Gurdjieff is the real thing, and Crowley's a crock of shit.
Right.
The real story is Crowley went to Gurdjieff's foundation. Gurdjieff wasn't there. He chatted with some people, went home, made note in his diary. This guy seems to know what he's about, except he's wrong about sex. And this went on. And that was it. No face-to-face, no interactive, story about this.
Yeah, somebody should really write the book of Aleister Crowley urban legends. That would be great. You mentioned earlier, you did say on that note, though, whatever Crowley was in service to, it probably wasn't the truth. I want to dig in on that and what you meant by that. It sounds like you have some opinions on that.
Well, Crowley wanted, of course, to be a writer, wanted to be a poet. Made several good attempts at poetry, no great attempts, I think. He knew the value of art is greater than the value of objective truth. And all magicians come to learn this. I will tell you a story from my own initiation. Several decades ago, I had a vast medical working at the Temple of Set. We had about 50 initiates there. And the working was badly. I designed the working, so I can't fault someone else for designing it this way. And I had not designed it so people could leave when their work was done. And one of the initiates, said, "Hey, I got to get out of here. This is wearing on me too much." So I was looking around for the person who was going to make the last statement that ended the work. Dear me, that room. So I'm looking. Is that them moving in that corner? Or is that this person? Finally found them. They ended the work. The next day, a very sincere, totally wonderful initiate came to me and said, "The most important moment in that working was when you walked up to us like this, and I understood in the depth of my heart you were telling us all to look further." And I had a moment. Oh my God, do I tell them that that's what I was looking for, was the guy to ring the last bell? And I thought, no, they had a true and absolute moment because they were in the high place of great meaningfulness, and I had taken them there. I was the shepherd of that state, that time. Art can overcome objective truth. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem is for the magician to discover which stories are art and which stories are just self-serving blather.
And where do you think that line was with Crowley?
I don't know that he knew. And this is not in any way to speak against him. Who did he have to teach him any of the higher states? Who did he have to hand off the tougher truths?
Well, he had the Golden Dawn and Eckenstein and Alan Bennett, and later on the OTO. Mathers. I mean, he had access to the greatest initiates of the time.
Well, and went beyond them.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the problem. Yeah. He stayed in Mathers' orbit.
Yeah.
He could have become whatever he could have become.
No, he became much more interesting when he went off and did Vision and the Voice and his own thing, I think, for a while, until it just kind of collapsed in on itself, in my opinion. But yeah.
Well, there, I think the problem was, again, a lack of peers. If everyone is expecting you all the time to be the wise, holy man, you run out of things to say. In India, we have these people that take this vow of silence when they reach a certain level of development. I think this because they're finished, talking about it.
Yeah.
It's not like
that must be nice.
Oh no, he is very holy, but he's being quiet. No, he's being quiet because he's said everything he needs to say.
Yeah.
And he said it, a large number of times.
Yeah, I do think that's a kind of a danger of magic, particularly when drugs are involved, just that you lose track of what's a story and what's not. That is a potential pitfall. The Temple of Set, is it still active? I feel like I haven't heard much. Are you still kind of in full swing, or are you just silent running?
Oh no, it's very active.
Okay.
Its current high priest is probably smarter than I was. It remains, a small active initiatory order. I changed the dynamic when I decided to start publishing stuff because my predecessor, Dr. Quino, was initially of the opinion that you couldn't publish. It's like, you can't give the truth away, or in my case, sell it for really reasonable amounts of money. I am of a different opinion that for me, for my personal practice, I have to articulate what's going on. I have to reify my initiatory states. There have been two really good high priests since me, and I suppose there will be active for quite some time. One of my students just a couple of years ago did a really good book, Toby Chappell, called Infernal Geometry.
Yeah, I've met him briefly.
Pardon?
I've met him briefly.
Yeah.
So the wait, I'm sorry, I may be confusing him with Vera Chappell. I may not have met him. Sorry, carry on.
And I'm sure among the, even of the newest generation, we're going to see some really great stuff. I think in the temple, the big saying is being a member of the temple set should be the least interesting thing on your resume. And I don't think that anyone is a member for the glory of being an occultist. And that's a big change. I remember like decades ago, that was the people saw that as this is the high point of my being, as I have this secret society I can send $75 a year to, as opposed to this is something that's helping me find my life work.
Yeah, that seems much healthier. One thing I want to talk about is, and I know it's maybe slightly uncomfortable, but were you in the temple during the Presidio scandal? And the reason that I ask this is not to dwell on it, but because something that I've talked a lot about in this podcast is how similar things are becoming to the Satanic Panic era in the 80s again, with people like the whole QAnon thing and people becoming obsessed with these topics again, which I think is quite worrying. And for occult people, and if they're not aware of it, I think they should be worried about it. I'm wondering if there's any insight you can offer from your perspective, whether you were around at that time or not, that may be relevant to what's happening now.
Actually, it was that time that brought me to the temple.
Okay.
As you may know, that once these accusations were made against Dr. Aquino, the way he proceeded legally was about, I'm not going to say, well, okay, I will say stupid. I mean, he's dead, so he's not going to rise from the grave and get me on that one. He assumed, as any probably rational human would, that all he had to do was show that he was an actual daily sign. He was undergoing training in Washington in a signed book every day saying, look, during the time this supposed abuse was taking place, I was in Washington, D.C. I wasn't even in San Francisco. And here's a record where I sign a book every day.
Yeah.
And got his real estate, and this called his real estate attorney and said, handle it. Not the correct response. So, drawn into controversy, he did things that he found pretty distasteful, like being on talk shows. Well, it so happened in a completely different, unrelated situation. Now, this was 2 years before the 300th anniversary of the Salem witch trials. I had received an invitation. I'm a short story writer. I've written a lot of horror stories, to write a story for a collection that was going to be about the Salem witch trials, about which I knew nothing. So I had accepted the invitation and gone out and got several books. And I'd been reading about the Salem witch trials all day. And I worked up a chart that showed all the states of the Salem witch trials, from vague accusation to when they started accepting spectral evidence, to listening to these frantic teens and mothers, to people making money off of it. As a little chart from, and I was very pleased with myself having researched this all day. So I put my chart down and turned on the TV. And the first thing I saw on the TV was this spinning Baphomet that came and filled up the whole screen. And a booming voice said, Geraldo Rivera.
The good old days.
Satanism in America.
It's so nostalgic for me, yes.
And I'm like, oh, whatever, And so I'm watching this. And I'm listening to these, there's like 4 occult experts. And then they had Zena from the Church of Satan and Dr. Aquino from the Temple Set.
I don't know if you've noticed, that is huge on YouTube, particularly with younger people who idolize Zena Louv, like young, very young people.
Zena's charismatic. I was a good friend of hers for some years, and then after we came to our bitter parting, people loved to put pictures on the internet of us standing together. And anyway, these experts, occult experts, were giving their talk, and so I picked up my chart, and I started just making notes on the side. Initially, I was thinking, hey, I'm just going to write a story about the current Satanic Panic. This is like a perfect niche.
Yeah.
And then at one point, there was this one investigator named Tom Wedge, and this guy Man, he must have weighed about 350 pounds on the hoof. He's a huge man. And he was saying, I don't know. You can't even believe the kind of blood these people use in their rituals. Blood, 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 blood. But I'm going after them. I have the names and addresses of every Satanist in America and their crimes. And in a very calm voice, Dr. Quino said, well, then why don't you arrest them? Just totally, deflated this whole moment.
Yes.
And I literally I saw, Geraldo make this gesture, and I heard them turn off Aquino's mic. I heard the pop,
No.
I had enough stage experience from exactly what I just heard. And I thought, my God, the one intelligent statement this entire night was from the Satanist with the weird eyebrows. He was the gooniest looking person up there. So the next night I went to a D&D, see, Dungeons and Dragons leads to Satanism. Yes. I got proof.
It definitely does.
D&D group, and I said, wow, I would give anything to know how to write that guy a fan letter. He managed to make Geraldo Rivera shut up. That has got to be supernatural power. And one person in the group gave me this look like she was going to hit me for saying that. And I thought, oh, fuck, I've touched a nerve here. And she walked over and said, you need to let me drive you home. And I went, okay. I have no idea where this is leading. And we get out in the car, and she says, do you really want to send Dr. Aquino a letter? Well, first off, that it was Dr. Aquino, and no one else had ever used that honorific, surprised me. And I said, yes. And she said, well, I'm seeing him next week at the International Conclave of the Temple of Set, and I could hand deliver it for you. First occultist I had ever met in my life that wasn't a few tacos short of a combination plate. Had a real job, a real house, did not have radically right-wing politics, which seems to be a disease in the occult.
Yeah.
So I went and wrote a letter and gave it to her. And the last thing I wrote in the letter was, I don't understand how you can have a group that prize individuality and yet still be a group. It seems too much of an inherent contradiction. And I gave it to her. She came back in a couple of weeks and had the response. And he had a very cordial response, and he thanked me for my letter. And ended with this ironic PS, we don't understand the individuality group thing either. Maybe you could join it and explain it to us. That was it. That was the whole recruiting drive for me. It was going to be a little sarcastic, jab back. And so I researched everything I could find out about this group, and that wasn't very much in those days. It was mainly extraordinarily negative. So with some trepidation, I joined. And I rose through the ranks during the Satanic Panic. It's a time where we would not give our name to a hotel where we're having a meeting, because we didn't want, protesters coming in. And we did have one conclave where they found out where we were. And, there were people outside with signs and so forth, very unpleasant. No, we're getting ready for that again. We're about to, because when Americans feel that there is, and this is true of anybody, I shouldn't say Americans, that sounds derogatory. When people feel they have a loss of control, they look for scapegoats.
Yeah.
And people who can do scapegoating become very powerful very quickly. I mean, the ultimate example is Hitler, right?
Mm-hmm.
He says to a totally defeated, sad Germany, it's not your fault. It's the Jews' fault. He doesn't explain how or why or what the Jews did.
Right.
But I can save you. He can save us. We want to be saved. Let's make Germany great again. There are certain political groups always that love scapegoating. There is a weak form of human power that comes with hatred. It's much weaker than love, stronger than fear. Fear is at the very bottom, then hate, then love, then wonder. But not everyone has the capacity for wonder. Wonder is what actually sets you apart. That's what makes you the elite. scapegoating always has power, and there's a lot of scapegoating going on now. And you always scapegoat the other. It can be the sexual other. It could be the ethnic other. It can be whatever. You could probably have a group rise up being against people that are left-handed, right? Because that was actually a pretty common Christian belief in the Middle Ages.
Mm. Have you faced a lot of, in your time, because you've been very public for a long time, writing books on Typhonian magic and things like this. Have you faced pushback or, interactions with fundies or dodgy situations at all, or just public attacks?
Well, yeah, but not in the sense that it was something I couldn't handle, and have people coming to my house and throwing eggs or things like that. My favorite moment was when David Icke, the guy that does the reptilian conspiracy.
Yeah, David Icke, yeah.
He publicly named me as a minor leader of the lizard people.
That's pretty cool.
So I wrote back a letter saying I am not a minor leader of the lizard people.
I would say I'm a major. I would say I'm a major leader of the lizard people. Get it straight. So that means that presumes that you have hordes of lizards at your beck and command.
Well, the problem that he's a fascinating case study, right? Because he developed all his power by hatred toward the other, and the other doesn't even exist.
Yes.
I mean, at least with Hitler, Jews existed.
Although he's often been accused of that being a thinly veiled anti-Semitic thing.
Yeah, there's a great book about that called Them, where someone...
yeah, I've read that. Yeah, John Ronson. Yeah.
Where it's like, no, he really does think they're lizard people. It's just the Jews are probably bad in his mind, but they're still not the lizard people.
Right. Although the people around him, you never know, right?
Well, because people join these things because they're fun, right? As long as it's not disturbing anything in their own life, it's a fun belief. It's like being a member of a UFO club. That's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun to think the people from Mizar 5 are coming or whatever.
Yeah, David Icke really did single-handedly suck a lot of the fun out of the occult, I have to say, just because he made it all he turned it all into a bad trip pretty quickly for people, just with his extreme fear of everything. That was unfortunate. Although some of his books are quite entertaining, I have to say. He later did ayahuasca and decided that love was the answer, but I don't think that lasted very long.
Well, yeah, the use of natural means to an unnatural state is never stable.
Yeah. So, yeah, you mentioned that it's not really an American thing, but a human thing. And I think you may or may not be aware. I mean, my primary magical teacher for a long time was Genesis Peorage, who I studied under. And of course, so I got to hear, at the same time, or maybe slightly, I think a few years after the Presidio scandal, was the Topi scandal, where in the British authorities, somebody accused, all of the Topi people were living in this kind of hippie house in Brighton, and somebody said, oh, they have a cult there, and they have a basement where they're forcing women to have babies, and then they're eating the babies, and just like all this insane stuff. There was like no basement. They weren't even in England at the time. They were in Nepal helping refugees by running a soup kitchen, and basically had to flee England. So England has their own obsessions, but much like America, and it is a human thing. But I mean, that said, America has some pretty obvious fault lines that crack under pressure. And I think the obsession with Satanists being everywhere is one of them, and has been since the Salem witch trials, for whatever reason, probably because we're a country founded by fundamentalist cultists. So that the QAnon thing is worrying. And so I was kind of curious, just from the experience you mentioned, if there's maybe anything you can share on how to deal with that if that becomes a bigger problem down the road.
Well, the things that work the best for me, be honest about your beliefs and practices. And by being honest, I mean, first off, pick the things that are going to be most offensive to people and just put it out there. Yep, we do this, we do that one. And talk about your goals, which is spiritual liberation, and then be situationally aware the same way you need to be all the time anyway.
Yeah.
Let's say, perfect example, when I was high priest of the Temple of Set, this German television station sent me a letter saying, we want you to come and say that the Temple of Set has no connections to Nazi occultism. And I said, well, we have no connections to Nazi occultism. No, but we will take you to Germany, and we're going to make a film, and you're going to stand at the gates of Auschwitz and say this.
Yikes.
And I was like, you actually expect me to be standing Arbeit macht frei over my head saying anything? And they offered not, and boy, that was a time when that money would have meant a lot more to me, by the way. But just being situationally aware, I knew what the image would be of the temple and myself for the rest of time would be me.
Yeah.
Standing at Auschwitz.
Speaking of video production and editing and reframing things.
Don't volunteer to be a freak in media conditions that you don't control. You are correct that the podcast is a oasis of clear thought. Years ago in Austin, there was a young lady who adopted the name of Claire Louv. I don't know what her real name was. And she hinted she was Louv's daughter, not in addition to Zena and Carol, whatever the older one is. And every year at Halloween, she would do a talk about the glories of occultism for the Austin American Statesman. They would have her come to her house, and it was suitably kind of B-movie satanic, and she would babble on this. So when the satanic panic came, the police raided her house. They treated all that as, man, this is really here.
Yeah.
And some of that footage even went into one of the TV documentaries about that. She played the game of thinking there's a certain degree of common sense. There is no common sense. Common sense exists when people feel in control of their lives. When people don't feel in control of their lives, they are looking for something that's causing the lack of control. I've got a good job. Why aren't I making any money? Something's causing this to happen, to go wrong. I'm making more than my father did, and yet I have a much worse house. Something is wrong. And the something is usually pretty complicated and difficult to get at and requires a lot of different levels of solution. Or it can be someone off in a forest dancing around a stone block and worshiping a goat.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned on email talking about the magical nature of Austin, which I'm very interested in. And one thing, I've been in Texas for 2 years now, having moved here from first, from Los Angeles and then New York before that, it is definitely, Christian fundamentalism is a lot more tangible and real here than on the coast for sure. And so that's something that I'm kind of getting used to. Maybe not in Austin as much, but certainly in the rest of Texas. So that's definitely something I'm kind of adjusting to. Is that something
Texas has a very strong Christian fundamentalist bent. And I see people in Austin who are very happy to put, their pagan and proud bumper sticker on their car. And that's great. You drive about 30 miles away.
Yeah.
Then you're like, you might as well put a bumper sticker in your car saying, please take notice of me.
Yeah.
You may throw rocks.
So how's navigating that? I mean, I don't even leave my house, let alone Austin. So, but that is something I've definitely become much more tangibly aware of. Whereas before, living in New York or LA, the idea of kind of fundamentalist America was, to be honest, kind of like an abstraction for me. It's like, oh yeah, in theory that's there, but I never see it, so it's not really a problem.
Well, we don't understand, if you're outside that mindset and have never seen it clearly, that is also a path to ecstasy. that these people actually do have religious bliss. These things that we may have encountered through meditation or some spiritual practice, they can get from hours of playing and singing and be
Sure.
overcome ecstatically.
Sure.
Ecstasy is only proof of ecstasy. It's not proof of truth.
That's a great line. So hopefully that's something that has been easy for people to navigate in Texas, or maybe not so much.
Well, since I grew up around that, then I pretty quick about feeling out where people are. I mean, the easiest thing is to ask people, what they think of as an odd experience, and then listen to that and why they think it's odd. People want to tell you their deepest, darkest secrets. It's dying to do. They just need permission.
Yes. So I'm curious what you were thinking about the magical nature of Austin, or we can have that conversation offline if you didn't want that on the podcast. But you sounded like you wanted to share something about that.
Well, there have been groups in Austin forever, and I think the true maga, since this is a Latin word, it is gendered. I think the true maga of Austin was the sculptor Elizabeth Ney.
Do you mean magicians or Make America Great Again? Just to clarify.
No, magician.
Okay.
Yeah. Make America Great Again being maga is really unfortunate for the one person, the two people I know that hold that title right now. She was a great magician, and she had a word. She chose the word sursum, which she even carved into the side of her building. And she did things like fight the Ku Klux Klan off her property with a gun. While she was making her great sculptures.
That's great.
And said to Texas, "We need to create a culture here, and I will make sculptures of your great heroes. Sam Houston and Stephen F. Austin and so forth. And we should idolize the good parts of them. I mean, there's a lot of bad parts about Sam Houston, but there's some good in that man too. And I will teach art here in the center of Texas, and I will make art part of the lives of Texans. And you can go and look at her sculpture, particularly her sculpture Prometheus. It just resounds with this very magical feeling. And it's very interesting because if you read her diaries, the moment she had her spiritual awakening was in Egypt. And she was traveling, looking at the sculpture. And she went to the great temple of Amun in Luxor and saw the giant Kefra beetle outside the temple. And went back and said, originally, this must have been all religion was self-creation. When she wrote this completely like studying article about the Kefir sign, and then came back and she was changed. Of course, for a while, Austin was the center of the OTO.
Right.
Before the Caliph left here for whatever reason, Austin used to be the center point. You hear it, the Scarlet Woman Oasis. There have been Brigifian groups here. There have been Steiner groups. You name it, they've always had a place in Austin. Austinites kind of love this stuff.
Do you have a sense of why?
I've some people argue it's because of the fact there's a magnetic fault going through the city.
Is that it?
It's like the Persinger theory, right? But there is something.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I never expected myself to be here, yet here I am, perhaps drawn by a magnetic fault. But that I really like it here. I think it's I really like it here. I'll probably be here for quite a while. Do you have any theories on why? It sounds like you view Austin kind of as a hot spot. Do you have any theories on why that is, outside of the magnetic fault?
Outside of, and I don't completely think that that's wrong. The fact it's a small city, it's a university city, so it has a significant part of its population of people in search of new experience. Has a huge thing to do with it. The fact that there's an absence of natural resources, so there's not one industry that dominates. A lot of the fact was that a lot of the initial settlers here came from liberal traditions in Germany and what we would now call the Czech Republic. All of those things help a great deal.
Yeah, the Crowley collection being here is certainly a dead giveaway as well. And I actually did not know that the Book of the Law is here. That's phenomenal. So any advice for interfacing with magical Austin as I continue to put down roots?
Visit the sites that are old and beautiful and interesting, and just be open to it and see what will come to you.
Any ones you recommend other than the Prometheus sculpture?
I like Lady Bird Lake. I'm so old, Austin. I already said Town Lake. Zilker Park is a great place to walk around and get lost in. Some of the neighborhoods in North Austin, there's just kind of a sense of beauty and style. Beauty always points toward mystery.
I love that.
And the less commercialized the beauty, the greater the pointing.
You must know Daniel.
And of course,
go ahead.
UT itself with its strange history. Why not?
You must know
Dr. Flowers heard the word Runa while he was a student at UT.
You must know Daniel Johnston.
Not directly, but yes, I know of him.
Yeah, one of the magical experiences that I had when I first got here was I found the tape of it. I'm hopefully going to be able to clean it up and put it on the podcast. I interviewed Daniel Johnston in San Francisco in 2002, and he at the time he wrote on a tiny ripped piece of paper his parents' address outside of Austin to send him the publication. And right after I got here and unpacked, as soon as I finished unpacking, for some reason that slip with his address on it was sitting in the middle of the house with his parents' address. So that was cool. You're a fiction writer, and I know you wanted to talk about that. That is something that, from our conversation, you were before you got into at least the Temple of Set, if maybe. I'm not sure which came first, that or the interest in the occult for you, or if that's hard to pinpoint. But you've said things in the podcast like, you need to reify your experience and so forth. So I'm very curious about the overlap between those two sides of yourself. That's something that most of the listeners of the podcast are artistic in one way or another. And I've written a bunch of fiction as well, and I'm hoping to get back to it because the magic side just really took over everything for a while there. So.
Well, fiction is a form of low-grade ritual, right? You have to discipline your mind to sit and read. You have a series of images that are given to you that you then relate to. The biology of reading is fascinating. For example, if you're reading an account of someone running and it's well written, your brain will actually access the very same set of nerves it would access if you were out there running. Fiction is about modifying subjective states, and then it produces a great change. And the best fiction takes you to a wordless place. That's really amazing, right? That you can be reading, say, James Joyce's The Dead, wonderful short story.
Yeah.
And you have this overwhelming feeling at the end, and you can't put it in words because he's taken you through the same steps that his protagonist went through. And you're left in this wordless place as the snow is falling gently over all of Ireland. Fiction comes from a desire to escape or modify or refocus reality. And magic comes from escape, to modify, escape, or refocus reality. They're the same factor, the same want, and often the same materials that use words. This is as true in other art forms. I can't speak of what it is to be a musician because I'm not a good musician, but my musical friends tell me that this is true for them. It is true for painters or sculptors or even great tattoo artists. The artistic impulse and the magical impulse come from the same place. The artistic impulse is probably in some sense more noble in that it is less concerned with worldly affairs or with self-benefit. Magic can be done for worldly affairs. It can be done for self-liberation. Art is often done just for art. And so for some reasons, for some ways, art is maybe even a higher octave than magic, if you use that kind of terminology.
Yeah, I think you were actually this is what you were alluding to earlier, but even Crowley says that in 8 Lectures on Yoga, where he says something to the effect of the greatest artist is far higher than the greatest magician. And that does seem to be, this is something that Kenneth Grant got a lot of traction out of, the idea of the artistic trance as a magical revelation. So,
well, I mean, Grant's strength and weakness is exactly the same, which was he became aware of this liminal state between waking and sleeping, or between waking and having a drug experience, or whatever state A and state B is. He circled the liminal state in between. He said, that's it. That's where the magic is. No, the magic can be anywhere, but you can become aware of magic in those states really well. He confused entering into magic with magic. And then that led to a lot of confusion.
That's a good
kind
point.
Of permanently high state of seeing connections that aren't there, and really bad gematria for
yes. Yes. I actually do want to ask you about that, because I think, as far as I know, I think you're the only person to write a book on Typhonian magic not from a Kenneth Grant perspective. And I'm curious where your divergence was there, if I have that correct.
That is true. And it became, the reason I did that is for our birthday some years ago, decades ago, Stephen Flowers gave me Bett's translations of the Greek magical papyri. And he says, there's sure a lot of spells in there about Set Typhon, his usual kind of indirect teaching method. And that's why I say, he just said, go study them. That's all he needed, right? Because if the student has enough kindling, all they need is a spark. And so I went and looked at all these spells about Set Typhon. I said, oh, there's some patterns here, some really fascinating things here. And in fact, I wrote a book eventually on just the figure of Set Typhon in Greek magical papyri called The Seven Faces of Darkness.
Yes.
And Grant approached the Typhonian current with no scholarship, just none. It's like, I sense the answer is Typhon. Well, good enough. And then starts writing his stuff. And then didn't go like and says, well, where did this appear mythologically? How has it existed in practice in the world? No, it's just, I invented this. In 1955, he wrote Gregorius, the head of the Trinitas Laterni, and said, hey, Gregor, it occurs to me we are entering the Aeon of Typhon. You and I should create a school that takes care of this. And Gregorius wrote back saying, I already have a school, but you are correct. It is the Aeon of Typhon.
Let me pause that real quick. This I haven't heard before. What was this something that Gregorius had just decided, or was there more to that?
From the material I've read, and I am very limited in my access to the Trinitas Laterni's documents. And the bigger problem is that the people in the Trinitas Laterni, even today, are bound by oaths. So they can't tell you anything. Sometimes ridiculously so. He was beginning to look at, among other things, the Greek magical papyri. And says clearly there is some force here, some demonic initiator. And so when Kenneth Grant got there through methods of ego annihilation, like breathing ether,
yes,
he found the right end. He found where the door is, but didn't find any methods to getting to the door or going through the door. Grant was headed in the right direction, but then didn't deal with the other problem of magic, which is taking the garbage out. And at least 9/10 of your work as a magician is taking the garbage out.
Yeah, for sure. Aeonics is always a funny one for me because I like your terminology of doors, because obviously Aeonics can be such like an ego contest. You know, my Aeon is bigger than yours, but the Aeon of Horus is the only one that I've found that actually has explanatory power. That's not just explanatory, but explanatory power you can't get away from, even if you want to. But the other ones are always interesting to me, and so I never heard about any of this Aeon of Typhon or how far that went, other than Grant's kind of general thesis that there is also this quote-unquote eternal Typhonian current that is just the formula of the opposer and the reversing a magical formula, which may, just like the rest of Grant, may or may not have existed anywhere except in his own imagination.
Well, I mean, the problem is that and it's interesting. Today, by the way, is the anniversary of Grant's death.
Today is.
Grant's failure is he never understood that a subjective truth is not an objective truth.
Yes.
And therefore he could present like his fantasies as this is something that happened. Like, he has this whole write-up of where he and this young witch were doing this sort of, I would say Cthulhuian, but he didn't call it Cthulhu, ritual, and then this creature comes out of the water.
Yeah, no, I love that one. His hentai story.
This happened, right? And you're like, okay, dude, you were either severely drugged out or something is wrong if you think that this actually occurred. But then it's like, it occurs in my mind what actually occurs. He just didn't quite have the philosophical grounding to do the work. And that happens a lot, right? People have some overwhelming experience, but no philosophical grounding.
Right. Yeah. Kenneth Grant has always struck me as somebody who's like, he's like an anime and hentai nerd that was born a couple generations too early for tentacle hentai. So he was trying to get there. I believe I heard a story from, I forget where it was, that when he died, he lived in a small walk-up in Golders Green, if you know this area. It's like a Jewish area in northwest London. It's a nice suburb. And he apparently had the biggest pornography collection that anyone had ever seen, that he just like dwelled around, and from which he based his magical states of gnosis and fantasy from, I think, which probably explains a few of these things.
Well, I mean, one of the signs you're succeeding as a magician is you need less stimulus from the outside world instead of more.
Yeah.
And now we live in a world where you can get any amount of stimulus from the outside world at any time.
Yeah.
No matter how specialized and slightly freaky your tastes are. About 5 years ago, some friends, we were joking about porn, specialized porn. And someone made the remark, maybe he'd already looked this up. I kind of suspect that he had already knew this was there. So, he could act dutifully surprised. He said, yeah, there's probably people that are into Grinch porn. Well, so we walked over to the computer, went to Pornhub, typed in Grinch, bam.
There you have. Are you aware of what Rule 34 is?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you have it. Yeah, no, this is hilarious. This is the funny thing. It's like, like as edgelordy as the most edgelordy occultists of the 20th century were, they could not possibly predict how utterly bizarre and just like nuclear, I don't know, like just mutated the modern world actually is. I mean, even when I go back and read like the most edgy Crowley stuff, like his writings about the Garden of Eden and things like this, or Kenneth Grant, it's just like, oh, this is so quaint. It's so it's just nostalgic and warm and fuzzy, like going to grandma's house, but they're talking about these unbelievable Gru insanity, but compared to the internet now, it's positively quaint. Well, when Grant found his way to Cthulhu, into Lovecraft in general, the things that Lovecraft were most frightened of were immediate things that he seized on as, oh, this must be the path of power. Yes.
I mean, neither of them is correct, right? The otherworldly is otherworldly.
Well, the other thing is like a lot of the stuff Lovecraft was writing about was not necessarily otherworldly, but was like thinly veiled racist caricatures as well. So, which people are much more aware of now.
Lovecraft was very definitely this highly prejudiced guy who also didn't even have any real idea what he was prejudiced against.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact the guy is a flaming anti-Semite marries a Jew, and never once in his writings or speaking about it sees a contradiction there. Right?
Yeah.
He was married to Sonia Green. He would still write these horrible things suggesting the Jews are in league with the powers of darkness. Like your wife that's putting bread and butter on your table.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to go back and revisit some of these towering figures as time goes on. Well, we've been talking. I just realized we've been talking for 2 hours now. I would love to have you back on the podcast. We should probably put a pin in it for now.
Okay.
But tell us, your book is your book out? How to Become a Modern Magus?
How to Become a Modern Magus is out.
Okay, and that's from it's from Destiny imprint of Inner Traditions.
Yeah, Inner Traditions book.
And how can people?
Some of the Destiny books line, yeah.
How can people find your work online? And beyond this book, what do you recommend they check out first?
The things I think that beyond this book that I think they would like, I wrote a book on vampiric magic from Inner Traditions called Energy Magic of the Vampire. A lot of people like that. My basic left-hand path book is called Uncle Setnock's Essential Guide to the Left-Hand Path.
A classic.
And if you're looking for some of my recent fiction, look for a book called Building Strange Temples.
What's this about?
It's a 30-year retrospective of my Lovecraftian writing.
Awesome. That sounds super good. All right.
I mean, Lovecraft only wrote Lovecraftian fiction for 20 years, and I've been doing it for nearly 40. Your victor here is me.
There you go. That's great. All right. Well, it was lovely to have you on, and hope to have you back on in the future.
All right.
All right. Hope you really, really enjoyed that. I definitely had a lot of fun in that conversation. Meet us at magick.me, magick.me, my school for magic, meditation, and mysticism, where you can learn all the skills you need to unleash your true self. I will see you in class, and until next time, hang in there.